am still officially on hiatus from making gaming videos for YouTube. There are a couple of topics I wanted to mention, and since progress on these other projects has been coming along very, very well, and my computer is acting right for a change, I thought I'd make a quick video about 3D in video games. I wanted to touch on this topic because it's been surprisingly controversial. My only experience with playing 3D video games has been the Nintendo 3DS, so everything I say is going to be in the context of the 3DS for the most part, but it's not. I don't really mean for this to be a Nintendo-centric or pro-Nintendo video. I just want to talk about just 3D in general in games. I know back when talk of 3D TV first started, a couple of years ago, and Sony was positioning themselves to be a front runner in that field, and really pushing 3D with the PlayStation 3. The narrative, the vibe sort of seem to be that Sony is once again, at the forefront of of AV technology, and Nintendo hasn't even gotten to HD yet, and they're so backwards, and they need to catch up. And it seems like once the 3DS was actually announced and once it was out, the narrative, and I'm probably exaggerating this a bit, frankly I'm probably taking it a bit personally because I am a Nintendo fan, it seemed like there was a new vibe that, Nintendo's, they're just relying on gimmicks again, and 3D is just a gimmick. And really for me, yeah, you could fairly call it a gimmick. Is it necessarily a bad gimmick? Are gimmicks themselves necessarily always bad? No. Look at, most of the things that we now take that are now standard features are initially started as gimmicks. A gimmick being something, to, attract attention to your product. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a bad thing when it doesn't add anything to the product to actually improve it or make it worth the extra money you're paying, or, make it worth the hype. Look at Star Fox 64, for instance. That was the first major release I can remember. That was probably one of the first major games with force feedback. It included the Rumble Pack accessory that you plug into the Nintendo 64 controller, and that was a major selling point for the game. I remember the videotapes Nintendo sent out back before they could just put up a YouTube video, and they'd say like, this lets you feel the game. It's so incredible. And I remember the buzz, in all the magazines. You could really feel when you take a hit or when you crash to an object. You actually have tactile feedback, and that was pretty impressive then. And now that's a standard feature in most video game controllers. And at the time, was it necessary? No. Did it enhance the experience? Like, arguably, yeah. But the game is perfectly playable and just as enjoyable without it. It just added to the feedback. It was just another element of feedback. And I've seen people talk about, 3D, it's just a gimmick, how does it doesn't change the gameplay. It has no impact on the gameplay itself. And it's like, yes, gameplay doesn't impact the gameplay itself, but it's adding to the video aspect of the game rather than the game aspect of the game. It seems like there are these two. It seems like when Nintendo's graphics are criticized on Nintendo systems, it seems like their fans often in support will say, well, it's about gameplay, not graphics. And then we have this other argument, like also sort of against something Nintendo's doing, that no, it's just graphics, it's not improving the gameplay. And it's just an observation I'm making. I'm not whining so much about that so much. It's So 3D, it's basically, as far as I see it, it's like visual force feedback. It adds volume to the image. I know in my experience with the Nintendo 3DS, the 3D works very well, and in fact, in general, I'm the sort of person who takes well to 3D anyway. I know 3D obviously is not for everyone. Everyone's eyes are different, everyone has different, visual acuity, everyone's eyes are different distance apart, which is why it's very good that in video games with the 3DS you get to adjust the 3D for the specific game, for the, the specific situation, your playing situation, like if you're on a train, you're moving around too much to get in the sweet spot to see the 3D. But, anyway, to get back to the point, 3D it's as long as it's optional, I don't see how it could be anything bad if it's being used effectively, like in most the 3DS games I played, the 3D works so well that I forget it's there, that I don't even notice it. It's just so natural. Anyone who has, two fully functional eyes, 3D is what they see every day out in the real world. So seeing it on a 2D surface, yes, there's an initial wow factor, there's an initial sort of novelty to seeing a 3D illusion on a 2D surface, as you saw with my first 3DS reaction. It was really incredible. But once that wears off, with the 3DS, for me, it works very well, and having seen many 3D movies in the theaters recently and having played 3D video games, I really believe that 3D adds a lot more to the experience of games than it does for movies. I think 3D in video games is less of a gimmick than it is in a movie, and I know and specifically, I'm just talking about Nintendo because I know I've read the Ask Iwata interviews, but just with 3D in general, they've said, like, we've been doing experiments, and, like, for instance, at Game Developer Conference 11, Iwata was saying, Miyamoto has been thinking about the idea of how, in a 2D Mario game, you see that Mario's clearly under the block and you jump up and hit it, whereas in a 3D Mario game, you're navigating a polygonal 3D environment, but there's no visual sensation of 3 dimensions, so that it's not as obvious when Mario's standing under a block or an obstacle. And some people have criticized that, like, oh, he's just making up excuses for this gimmick. And what I have to say to that is, this man thinks about these design issues as for a living. He's been thinking about these things. I know I've been reading concerns of things Miyamoto has said about about polygonal, moving in a 3D environment without the sensation of 3D. He's been talking about this sort of stuff since Mario 64, so this is nothing he just made up to justify the use of 3D on the 3DS. And I understand what he's saying, because I know a lot of people, I know a few people who were playing all the 8 and 16-bit Mario games, and once they went to polygonal 3D in Mario 64, they really couldn't relate to it. It was sort of got too complicated for them. So, and now we have, the 3D itself isn't transforming the gameplay, but we have, for one example, Super Mario 3D Land, where the actual level design and the camera angles and the gameplay elements are made with the sensation of 3D in mind, but at the same time, you don't need the 3D to play the game at all. You could turn it off and it's just as playable. And when it comes to 3D on home systems, I don't have a PlayStation 3, and I haven't really tried in-home 3D. I haven't tried a 3D TV yet, or played video games on a large HD screen yet. But I know I compared the 3DS, the fact that the 3D is built in, you don't need glasses, to the PlayStation 3D monitor in a video, and people thought that I was dissing the PlayStation 3's 3D or the 3D monitor. That's absolutely not the case. I was responding to something that a host on G4 said that I thought was silly. I actually thought the PlayStation 3D monitor was one of the coolest things Sony showed at their E3 media briefing, and they call it a monitor, but really the size of that thing, that's bigger than the TV that I had in my living room growing up. That's bigger than the TVs a lot of people probably played Super NES and Genesis on back in the days. So they call it a monitor, but to me, $500 for an HD 3D set, when a full-size TV that's going to cost you $1,000. So to break into in-home 3D, the PlayStation 3D monitor I think is a pretty good deal. And that's not a priority for me. I'm not in the market for that. But I know someone who's been playing their PlayStation 3 on a standard def TV, and that might be a good deal for them. And they're definitely, investigating that as a possibility. So, long story short, 3D to me, it's just like force feedback, like rumble in a controller. It's not necessary. It doesn't transform the gameplay. It adds to the experience a bit, but it's not something that the entire experience can rely on. At the end of the day, you still have to have a playable game. You have to have a game that you'll want to see in 3D. And of course, having a good gameplay concept is going to come before any sort of visual feedback that doesn't bear directly on the gameplay. So that's my take on 3D in video games. Thank you very much for watching.